All right, I'm going to be simplifying and solving all these problems from our MCTC quiz number 1. Let's start with number 1. Simplify the expression and show each step as you go. I've pasted the order of operations up here in the top right corner to help me. And we're going to go step by step. Step 1 says to simplify any explicit groups, anything in parentheses or brackets, and there are none of those. Step 2, to simplify any implicit groups, numerators, denominators, absolute value bars, radicands, exponents. There is an exponent, but there's no group inside of that exponent, so there are no implicit groups. Start 3 says work from left to right, simplifying each operation beyond the basic 4. We do have an exponent. That's an operation that is kind of special. It's beyond the basic 4. So when I list out my steps here on the side, oopsies, I'm going to start with my exponent. Step 1, exponent. 2 to the 5th means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and that is 32. Everything else should stay the same so far, because I want you to do one step at a time. That's the only special operation, so step 3 is done. Now we can move on to multiplication and division. We always work from left to right. So we're going to divide first in this case. 32 divided by 8 is 4. Everything else should stay the same. Now looking at what's left, there's a subtraction, but there's also a multiplication. Multiplication happens before we subtract, before we move on to the next step. So we'll multiply. 0.5 times 14 is 7. So I'll substitute that 7 in there. I forgot to list off my last couple steps. I divide, then I multiplied. And finally, if I can fit another one in here, step 4 will be to subtract. And 4 take away 7 is -3. My final answer is -3. And there were 4 steps, or four operations. To answer number 2, we always name an expression based on the last operation. The last step. And in our case, we subtracted. We call that a difference. Anytime you have two numbers, we're subtracting them, we get the difference. Let's move on to question 3, another simplifying one. This one has a set of parentheses, but there's nothing inside of the parentheses to simplify. So we'll move on to our implicit groups. There are 2 implicit groups. This is an implicit group, and this is an implicit group. Because they're in the numerator of a fraction, we need to simplify the numerators before we can move on, before we can do anything else. So let me list my steps over here. Inside of those implicit groups, there is addition and multiplication. We're going to multiply before we add. Even inside of those little groups, we still use the order of operations. So we're going to multiply 4 and 3, and that gives us 12. Let me rewrite. We have 12 plus 12 over 12. That was one of my multiplications, and I'm also going to multiply on the left. 4 times 3 is 12 as well, so 12 minus 12 on the left. Not only did I multiply twice, I'm going to list it twice. We multiplied twice. Now there are still implicit groups. These are still groups. Multiple numbers and an operation. We need to keep simplifying that. So I'll start on the left. 12 plus 12 is 24. And 12 minus 12 is 0. That was another 2 steps. I added first, and then I subtracted. All of that was just to clear up my implicit group so that I have a number in the numerator. Now, if I look at my operations that are left, I can see there's 2 divisions and a subtraction. We need to divide before we subtract, and there are 2 things to divide, so I'm going to list it twice. 24 divided by 12 is 2. I'll leave the negative there for now. 0 divided by 12 is 0. And we can finish this off by subtracting. So step 7 is to subtract. That's a total of 7 operations. Each time we multiplied, we counted them separately. Each time we divided, we counted it separately. So if you didn't get 7, try to recount them. Now, implicit and explicit grouping and operations. This is from lesson 1.1. So if you weren't very clear on these, please make sure to go back and use these examples right now to help you get some good notes. An explicit operation is one that's very clear and obvious. Clear and obvious. An operation is something we do to the numbers. So if I looked at an example like this numerator here, the plus symbol is a very clear and obvious symbol. So that is an explicit operation. It's telling us to add. Now, an implicit operation is not clear. It's implied. It's an operation that is not there. Maybe an invisible operation. It's a good way to think about it. And actually, the same group has an implicit operation, because when we squish 2 numbers together like this, that means to multiply. 4 and 3 means to multiply. There was no symbol that told us to multiply. We just know that. We know that means to multiply. So that's an example of an implicit operation. The last question was about exponent rules, and we're looking at the student work to decide if it was correct or not. And actually, the student does the first few steps correctly. We can use the quotient rule. It says as long as we have the same base, we can subtract the exponents. We can use that to help us simplify the first fraction. 5, and I'm going to subtract the exponents, oopsies. 9 take away 3, well, 9 take away 3 is 6. So this first part is good. Let's look at the second quotient. We have 2 on top, and we're subtracting a -4, which is the same as adding. That does turn out to be 5 to the 6th as well. Those 2 parts were done fine. It's the last step that we're not done correctly. 5 to the 6th times 5 to the 6th is not 5 to the 36th. And I'll show you why. If I expand 5 to the 6th, that means 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. Here's one group of 5 to the 6th. And I'm going to multiply that again by 5 to the 6th. You should be able to see that there are not 36 factors of 5. If I counted these up together, I could see that there's 12 of them. 5 to the 6th times 5 to the 6th equals 5 to the 12th. 12 factors of 5. That should have been the final correct answer, not 5 to the 36th. Thanks for watching.